Hi there. I'd like to show you something, a piece of Australian motorsport history that's quite special to me. This is a Holden Racing Team poster from 1998, and one of these men is special. One of these men beat Mark Webber in 2 championships and Jamie Whincup in another. He's won races against IndyCar drivers and Bathurst champions. He became the first Australian to drive a Ferrari Formula 1 car. He lined up a sponsorship deal with Red Bull. He also never won a Supercars race. Nope, it's not him. Of course it's not him. There he is. If we show the stats of everyone on this poster, we see series and Bathurst champions, the greatest drivers of the age. Some of these guys have video game stats, and Mark Noske sticks out like his father's Kalari Commodore. But as we know, pure stats don't tell the whole story. He's one of a series of Supercars drivers around the start of the post-ATCC era who did some great things in lower categories and seemed destined for stardom, but through luck, bad decisions, or misadventure, things failed to work out for them. Their stories are varied, but each story seems intrinsically linked with every other. As you'll see, threads fall and stack and intertwine with each other like an Alabama family tree. For Noske, it started with some great battles in Formula Ford, beating Jason Bargwanna, Todd Kelly and Mark Webber to third in the 1995 championship. He graduated to Formula Holden and the Holden Young Lions team. His first almost moment was the 1997 Bathurst event. Co-driving with Bargwanna and coming off a 9th at Sandown, their car had top 10 pace before Bargs binned it pre-race. Considering a bunch of hopefuls crashed out that day, filling the top 10 with privateers, including someone or something called a Malcolm Steniken, they would have had a real podium chance. Noske beat promising youngster Simon Wills to round out the top 3 in his first Formula Holden season, earning his first full-time Supercars drive with the Young Lions. He ran 19th in just over half a season's running, as the program kind of faltered slightly, but still pretty impressive running. He tried his hand in America, testing with Cool Green and setting up a plan to race Indy Lights in 2000 and then the Indy Racing League the next year, but a lack of funds killed that opportunity before it really started, another almost moment in a career that was quickly filling up with them. He then ran in the Nations Cup for a couple of years, beating out Paul Stokell to earn another championship third place. He ran his own entry in the Supercars Championship in 2003 with ex-Gibson/00 Motorsport equipment, which spawned this awesome livery and then this less awesome one. That season was his best though. If not for this horrific Pukekohe crash ruling him out for 3 races, he would have beaten this guy, who went on to become this guy. His biggest almost moment came when a Red Bull sponsorship deal fell through that year, which would have brought funding for 2 cars, including bringing in Mark Winterbottom, who Noske had a good run with at Bathurst before an engine failure ended their day. So unfortunately, the owner-driver 2-car 2-Mark team in 2004 was run by Mark Larkham, not Mark Noske. And then Winterbottom did this, and later this, and this. The champion in those 2 seasons, Marcus Ambrose, is often credited for bringing Penske to the series later on, but it was actually Noske in that first Ambrose championship year who brought engines assembled by Penske to the series, and they seemed alright, I guess. No top 10s, but less retirements that season than Glenn Seaton's operation, which was a positive. The killer is this though. In 2020, the 2 dominant teams in the series are Red Bull HRT and DJR Penske. Mark Noske nearly combined the key elements of the 2 of them 17 years ago and would have had a future series champion at the helm. They could have been anything. As it was, it opened the door for Wright Patton Shakespeare, and good old Craig Blood and Gore bought the team, bringing equipment from what was left of Gibson and 00 and another team, which I'll get to later. Noske was forced to rideshare briefly before leaving what used to be his own team at the end of 2004. The funny thing was, that team merged with Mark Larkham's operation a while later and ended up bringing Noske's former teammate Jason Bargwanna with them. Noske was now doomed to co-drive for the rest of his career in the endurance races, and his final almost moment came, again, co-driving with Jason Bargwanna at Bathurst. It was 2009. and Tasman Motorsport, unbeknownst to a lot of people, were in their death throes. Appropriately enough, it was the second team Noske was to drive with who rejected an energy drink sponsorship, this time with Rockstar. They were running third late in the piece until Jamie Whincup happened to them. Actually, remember how Whincup only beat Noske by 1 point in 2003, and he went on and did this? Well, he did this later that year, and eventually drove for these guys, who could have lifted Noske to the top. Life is cruel. Noske's career ended the next year, at a team owned by the son of the man who owned 00 Motorsport, where Noske himself had sourced his car from 7 years prior. This circularity was lost on the motorsport gods as he closed his career with some unincredible mid-pack finishes. It's sad. He beat Bargs in that 95 series, but from that 97 drive to their 09 drive together, their careers did this. Noske's teammate at WPS in 2004, David Bernard had potential to be so much more than just a 2-time race winner. Beating Marcus Ambrose, Jason Bargwanna and Todd Kelly in Formula Ford, and winning the corresponding American Championship, he headed to Stone Brothers Motorsport. He had a breakout 2002, winning the Queensland 500, the second biggest race on the calendar. In 2003, Stone Brothers benefited from a fast new BA Falcon package. They win the Teams Championship and the Drivers' Championship. For Bernard, there's only one problem. He's not there. He was forced out for superstar Russell Ingall, and he moves to a Ford factory operation that's very much in its infancy. He's teammates with Lowndes and Seaton, but they all struggle. He's let go, tail between his legs, and completes a miserable 3-year stint at the all-talk but no payoff WPS outfit with only 1 week's worth of highlights. The, in his words, lucky win at Tasmania, in Mark Noske's old car by the way, as well as a great champ car race soon after. But he did this, and the SBR boys had trended a bit more positively. He went back to Stone Brothers after Ambrose had gone. He co-drove James Courtney to 2 successive podiums at Bathurst. He ended his career a year after this spectacular crash with a forgettable drive for Brad Jones Racing. Going back to that day in Queensland in 2002, it takes 2 drivers to win that race, and Simon Wills was one amazing driver. What you can't see in this picture though is that he was part of this team 2 rounds before. Briggs Motorsport was in crisis, and so Wills, having joined for the Bathurst race the previous year, was doomed before he even started there. Coming off a development series title and entering a backmarket team is nothing new. Many careers have been ended prematurely this way, but none quite so efficiently or cruelly as Wills. Wills went to Team Dynamic in 2003, a new high-promise team that Wills had won the development series with. Results were poor until another great showing in the 500 now at Sandown, where the entry crashed from second place in the dying stages. Again, there was hope. He'd even get a fastest lap and 2 6th places in 2004, despite the car still being a bit of a turd. But hope, again, was to die quickly and with great savagery. In August 2004, Wills was manipulated by his team to perform an illegal test drive of the car at Woomera. This was met with a record fine that saw the beginning of the end for the team. The 45 cars running was outsourced to Tony Longhurst's operation, who eventually replaced Wills for the Enduros. Wills finished 34th in the standings that year as Team Dynamic died a death louder than it deserved, mired in more courtroom squabbles. It had killed Wills' interest in the sport. He was given Brad Jones' seat in 2007 after Brad Jones' shock retirement, after sharing testing roles with Bernard. Fittingly, his career ended with 1 top 10 and 12 points for the season, the same amount in 29 races as Longhurst scored in his only race that season. Wills' seat was taken by Steve Owen at Briggs Motorsport. We'll get to him. First, I want to talk about Dale Breed. He took the endurance seat at that team after strong second-tier performances, but turned down Brad Jones Racing in order to do so, which is weird considering how Brad Jones hired John Bowe from the Briggs operation, freeing up the seat for Wills. They'd promised him a full-time drive at Briggs in 2003. He didn't get it. Briggs found new money-laden ownership, so while Paul Radisich scored 10th in the championship with a brand new BA Falcon, Breed was forced to co-drive for John Faulkner in an ancient Commodore. There was a team trying to lure Garth Tander, who rejected them late in the piece, so they turned to Breed. And so in 2004, Dale Breed and Simon Wills lined up for Team Dynamic, meaning Wills now drove with the man who replaced him after turning down a drive with the man Wills replaced. It's peak Australian motorsport. He ran one full season of unreliability and mediocrity and then got dumped. Now, remember earlier when he burned the Joneses? Here he is driving for them in 2005. For a man you've never heard of before, he sure was linked to everyone. However, in 2006, he was linked to tragedy. He was the partner Mark Porter in 2006 for Bathurst, but Porter was killed in the development series race that weekend. They pressed on with the entry, hiring Michael Caruso, but Breed's career ended after he forgot to pump the brakes during a pad change. He was uninjured, but decided to end his racing career, which had done this since Briggs backed out on their promise. Steve Owen's career trajectory after Briggs, though, was immediately worse. He also didn't get the 2003 Briggs seat and ran part-time campaigns in both the Supercars and Development Series championships, battling with Breed at times in the latter. He then revisited Formula Ford, a massive step back, but finishing third in a competitive field headed by Dave Reynolds. A part-time Brytech role in 2005 led to a full-time return in 2006, where he immediately crashed at Adelaide after suffering dehydration. It was a pacey season though, outscoring Bow and Greg Murphy. He improved with a great showing in 2007, which of course meant he lost his drive. Wait, what? Well, Tony D'Alberto, reigning second-tier champion, essentially bought his drive at Rod Nash Racing. Funnily enough, Owen replaced D'Alberto as champion when he won the series the next year, beating Reynolds in a stacked field. So 2009 meant he could join a good team full-time, just like D'Alberto did, right? Or, and hear me out on this, he could co-drive with a crap driver for the Enduros and waste a season. Yeah, I think he'll do that instead. 2010 now, and Owen becomes the second person to repeat as Development Series champion. The first person, by the way, this bloke, who drove for Briggs in 2003, replacing Owen in doing so. It's weird. Now, normally no one can win that series twice, as, it's the development series, and the cream generally rises to the top tier. But Steve Owen, as well as Dean Canto, had become prime examples of why this system doesn't always work. He just bossed a field with 3 future Bathurst winners in it, and his prize was to drive for one of the guys he'd just beaten, in a mid-pack team destined never to win. His final full-time drive was an 8th place in Sydney in 2012, as the team he was driving for was yet again bought out, and yet again he had to drop down a level. Owen scored a podium co-driving in 2013, and his fate was sealed as a talented co-driver stuck on the outside. He's won 2 endurance races, neither of them Bathurst. Fittingly, the same fate would befall Tony D'Alberto and fellow 2-time series champion Paul Dumbrell. Steve Owen didn't win the Formula Ford Championship he contested in 1998. He came 7th in somewhat of a weaker field. Top of this field was Adam Macro, who immediately got a Bathurst start with Alan Jones. And yes, that Alan Jones. He never turned a wheel in the race, but saw action with Tony Longhurst the next year. He would co-drive in various teams in relative anonymity until 2005, exploding onto the scene with 4th in a development series. He got a ride with Triple Eight where he finished 3rd at Bathurst. He used his connections with Triple Eight to get a car and use that car to dominate the development series in 2006 like no one had before. He then used that to leverage a drive with Jason Bright at Bathurst the next year, but they became one of the many almost stories of a fantastic Bathurst race. And then he just stopped. His first and only non-endurance race was a fill-in appearance for Paul Radisich. The most dominant Super 2 title winner to date chose a family life, over the career uncertainty that had plagued so many, and I can't say I blame him. His brother, Tim, seemed to suffer a similar fate. He won 2 Australian Drivers' Championships among a great local open-wheel career, without really going any further up the ladder. And there's 100 stories like this of these lower-tier champs whose supercars careers languished in fetid machinery. Greg Ritter at a dying 00 Motorsport in an unfinished FPR car. Cam McLean getting his team bought out after finishing 4th at Bathurst. Mark Larkham having his team fall over. Anthony Tratt's career-ending crash right as he got a good ride. Baird and Luff forever in co-driver hell. Scott Pye getting dropped for Scott McLaughlin right before DJR geared themselves up to win the title. Dougal McDougall, who had the best name in motorsport, and so many more. But there's bad luck, and then there's the story of one man who crossed a black cat while breaking a mirror as he walked under a ladder. You definitely know someone who always leaves the party early. Stephen Ellery is the ultimate version of that person. Starting as a privateer with pretty good results, he was selected by a restructuring Triple Eight to partner Craig Lowndes. His Bathurst appearance with Macro was his third place at that venue, but it was his only podium of the year, while Lowndes nearly won the championship. Triple Eight now had a decision to make. Keep a 31-year-old who may be underperforming, or hire a young up-and-comer. They cancelled the last year of Ellery's contract and hired a risky prospect who finished in front of Ellery and Macro at Bathurst that season. Triple Eight found their stride in 2006. That young fellow won his first race for the team. Ellery never raced full-time again, while his replacement tacked on 7 championships as well for good measure, leaving Steve Ellery as perhaps the biggest almost driver in the category. He joins Simon Wills, Steve Owen, John Bowe and Dale Breed as drivers who, in one way or another, have been screwed out of contracts by Briggs Motorsport. Yep, Briggs got bought out by Triple Eight in 2003, and they continued to be ruthless in terms of swapping their driver lineups. Here's a fun little chart showing every driver to have raced for Briggs Motorsport or Triple Eight in a non-endurance role. For a team that existed for 9 seasons and was a single car operation for 4 of those years, to go through 12 full-time drivers, including using the same one twice, is ridiculous. So what happened to Steve Ellery is even more egregious when you find out that now, over 14 years since his last race with the team, he's still the last ever full-time driver that they dropped from their lineup. I mean, sure, Craig Lowndes is in an endurance role now, but he's still driving with the team. They never dropped him. Whincup's still with Triple Eight. Shane Van Gisbergen, who they hired 7 years after Ellery stopped racing altogether, is still with Triple Eight. And they'll all retire there, each enshrined as champions with the team in some way, while Ellery remains an often forgotten footnote. Well, that was depressing, so let's end on a bit of a lighter note. There were hundreds of men and women who stepped into V8 supercars over the last 30 years. There have been champions. There have been the one-off underdog winners, and as we've shown, there's been the forgotten, almost superstars that make the category what it is, that give character and a bright side to the series. There's one man, though, who lays well astride the bottom of the pile. He would turn up and get ground into mulch, and that was before the big guns had even set a wheel onto the track. He turned up and made so little of an impact that a parked car on the side of a racetrack may well have affected the Australian motorsport world more than him. And that's why I love him. That's why I need you to meet David Thexton. David Thexton was a New Zealander. That's hardly a barrier to success in the series, especially today. He was a businessman, but then again, a lot of gentleman racers have been adequate, if not outright successful, in the series. He had a passion for racing, and a passion for supercars. Sadly, he was not very good at racing those supercars. This is a poll I found online. 29 people have voted for the worst supercars driver of all time. There's been votes for Andy Jones, Max Wilson and Paul Morris, who are average drivers at best or worst. A couple for Bernard, but we've exonerated him. Ambrose, Coulthard, Tander and McLaughlin get votes from either salty fans or those with short memories. Take them out and you're left with 2 twin towers of terribleness. One is Rodney Forbes, son of Bob, whose 2003 points total Ellery outscored in the endurance round alone while Ellery was a privateer. But Forbes almost always had championship or Bathurst-winning teammates acting as a second or even third car in pathetic 5-year-old machinery. When he went to the Carrera Cup and later the Nürburgring VLN series, he even won some races. David Thexton, on the other hand, didn't. David Thexton entered 22 races. He only qualified for 7. 7! That's 15 DNQs, the most in the category's history, and 15 more than Forbes. In fact, he had to withdraw from a round at Oran Park after belting David Bernard so hard he was labelled a safety hat. Thexton was an amateur rally driver in New Zealand, but after selling one of his companies to Coca-Cola, he just flat out bought Ken McLean's Supercars team, which ended his career prospects. And then Thexton just started circuit racing in the biggest category in Australia. What a baller. Thexton, including lower series, never finished any series standings higher than 22nd in the table. He was deeply terrible. I'll put his terribleness like this. When Tim Slade, an average driver, defeated an all-star field to win his first race, he finished in front of 25 different people. That's just in one of his 330 plus races. David Thexton managed that number across his whole 22 event, 7 race Supercars career. It made me wonder, what does it take to finish behind David Thexton? It can't be skill. Bad luck, perhaps? Or a damaged car? But how did you crash when the world's worst driver has somehow managed to keep his nose clean? I decided to compile one more chart, and it's got a real kicker at the end. I documented a list of each driver to ever finish behind David Thexton in a Supercars race that he qualified for. If a driver DNF'd, he didn't finish. He had to physically cross the line behind the slowest driver in the category's history. I then sorted them by their total wins in their career across all categories. It's an arbitrary way of showing skill, as for example Slade's 2 Supercars wins plus his 2 time attack wins over the last 10 years, his only wins in his career, put him lower than Glenn Seaton's kid who races in lower series against mainly idiots. But whatever, the important thing is to show how many more wins they have than Thexton, which is any amount at all. So let's see what we get. So we start with some modest gentleman drivers. Then we have Manassian, an international standard driver who's done American Le Mans series. Bright, Owen, Dumbrell, fantastic co-driver level operators, as Mark Noske would put it. Grant Johnson, mostly a national level racer, but quite successful. Then there's Baird and Bow, 2 amazing drivers in their day. All of these guys are quality drivers, but for whatever reason passed the checkered flag looking at the rear of the Thexton Racing 99. But there's 2 guys that let Thexton by multiple times. The first, a man you might remember from the Rick Kelly video, is championship-winning teammate Garth Tander. And the last one? The guy that David Thexton beat more than anyone else. 3 times he finished behind the worst driver to ever race in the category and perhaps the country. Which is fitting, I guess. There's a nice circularity to it all, which befits the circularity that we've seen across this entire documentary. The worst of all time somehow managed to constantly defeat the greatest of all time. Half of Thexton's starts, if you round up, he finished ahead of the greatest driver to ever race in this series. And speaking of that circularity, let's get this photo back up. That's Rodney Forbes driving for 00 Motorsport. As he was receiving the cast-offs from his more successful teammates, he was the only one who could donate cars further down the line, which means that it's very likely that his cars were bought by this man for 2003. In fact, his 2004 ride was certainly ex-Forbes, meaning that he drove 2 cars steered by the second worst driver ever. And what ended up happening to Thexton Motorsport? Well, the contract for that entry was bought out partway through 2004 by this man. Yep. The Supercars career of this driver, who got on a poster with 3 of the greatest drivers of the era and actually drove endurance races with 2 more of them, was made possible by the 2 very worst drivers to have ever raced in the series. And I couldn't think of a more fitting way to end this video than that. So that's been the stories of the almost drivers of the Australian Supercars series. If you enjoyed it, leave a like. If there's something you'd like to see a video on, drop a comment. And if you want to see more mini documentaries like this, then pretend you're David Thexton and that the subscribe button is David Bernard at Oran Park and smash into it at high speed. Hopefully there'll be some more videos coming through soon. I'll see you then.